So I have a couple of folks online who I've worked with closely. And so if I could ask Miss Rosalind Brown to give a quick hello.
I will give a quick hello. My name is Rosalind Brown, and I am working with Kansas East Jurisdiction, Church of God in Christ in Kansas City, Kansas. And I'm going to say my passion is community engagement. I don't know that I knew that initially, but since I've been involved these past few years, it's very important to me. So community engagement.
And I see that, Miss Rosalind, every time we talk. So thank you for the work that you're doing. And Miss Terry.
Good afternoon. My name is Terry Barnes. I'm with the Nia Project. And my passion is community, particularly African-American girls and women.
Thank you so much. And Doctor, I'm going to say your name wrong. I'm so sorry, but Dr. Seo.
Hi, it was very close.
Okay.
I'm Hyunjin Sa. I'm professor at the University of Kansas and also director of KU Center for Digital Inclusion. Our center promotes digital equity, and recently we have been working with marginalized populations to provide digital content-based vaccine campaigns. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else who's new? I think I've called on everyone I know personally, and if I haven't, I apologize.
This is Virgil Watson.
There he
Virgil, yay. Glad to see you.
And you forgot me, Courtney. I'm hurt.
Virgil, Miss Rosalind said you weren't here. So
Well, it just shows you that she doesn't always keep track of everything. So, but my name is Virgil Watson, and I'm with St. James Church of God in Christ. And my passion is wellness within the Black community. And that's what I've gotten passionate about.
thank you, Virgil. Thank you.
I was also wondering, Olivia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Olivia Puemo. I'm Prairie Band Potawatomi. I work with the Southern Plains Tribal Health Board. I work as a Kansas public health specialist, so I do health education, whether it's through trainings or workshops with tribes in Kansas. Thank you for having me.
Welcome. Is there anybody else that is here for the first time that would like to introduce themselves? Okay, well, thank you all for the introductions. And I want to acknowledge that our friend and colleague Broderick Crawford is not able to join us today. He's still recovering, and we are carrying on with our work as I know that he would want us to do. So I would like to move into the vaccine update, if you don't mind putting the slides back up. Wonderful. Let's see, we're going to do the vaccine update. So next slide. Next slide. Here we go. Okay, sorry, back up one. Perfect. Okay, so this slide is a recap of vaccine rates broken down by age. So I want to really focus on the second row, which is the percentage of people who have completed the primary series of COVID vaccines. So that would be in general 2 doses of vaccine. So in Kansas, we have 60% of the total population fully vaccinated, 89% of those 65 and over, 71% of adults fully vaccinated. And then we see a big fall off in rates in kids in Kansas. So for youth 12 to 17, we have about half fully vaccinated and 22% of kids ages 5 to 11. And then I want to spend a minute on the third line, which is the percentage of people who have received an additional dose or a booster dose. So this is generally referred to as being up to date with the COVID vaccine. And you can see that we're not doing as well on boosters, with only 25% of the population having received a booster. Adults 65 and over are the most boosted age group with 58%. And then it falls off sharply for adults 18 and over. And then in kids ages 12 to 17, it's only 10%. Next slide, please. So this slide shows vaccination rate trends by age since August of last year. And this is all to say that vaccination rates are pretty stagnant now for all age groups. Next slide. And this is a snapshot of COVID over the past year in Kansas. So the first graph on the left is daily cases, which peaked at over 10,000 cases per day in January. And that has steadily declined, and we are now down to about 460 cases per day. The second graph is deaths from COVID, which peaked in February and are also declining and are down to about 4 per day. Third graph is testing, which is declining as well after having peaked earlier this year. And then the final graph is vaccinations, which you can see are also declining. Next slide, please. I just want to focus for a moment on youth vaccination trends on this slide. So the bottom line is the vaccination rate for the youth in Kansas, and then the broken line right above it is the vaccination rate for the youth in the whole United States. So this is a place where we have work left to do in our state because the youth vaccination rate has consistently lagged about 5 percentage points behind the national average. Next slide. So this slide shows adult vaccination rates across races and ethnicities. So starting on the left is vaccination rate by race. So you can see that white vaccination rate is 55%, Black vaccination rate is 45%, Asian 61%, American Indian vaccination rate is the highest at 87%, and then Hawaiian Pacific Islander is at 49%. And then if you look on the far right side of the slide, that's ethnicity data for adults. And you can see that the Latino vaccination rate is at 69%, and which is a little bit ahead of the non-Latino rate, which is at 63. Next slide. This is a similar slide for youth vaccination across race and ethnicity, and the story here has some similarities and some differences. So in terms of the race data, the highest vaccination rate is in Asian youth, followed by white youth, American Indian, Black African American, and then Pacific Islander. And then for Latino youth, the rate is the same as for non-Latino youth. So next slide. This is my last slide. Excuse me. And this is a summary of ongoing initiatives for vaccine equity. So first we have the PAVE grant, which stands for Pandemic Assistance Vaccine Equity Grant. These are micro grants of up to $10,000 that many different types of groups can apply for to do vaccine related work. Courtney Hayden has been instrumental in increasing awareness of this funding and also supporting applicants through the process. And we get to hear soon from Ms. Terry Barnes, who has done amazing work with her grant. Then we have the vaccine clinic expansion. So we continue to work with KDHE, local health departments, FQHCs, and community partners to support vaccine efforts. And we're expanding our work in areas of high social vulnerability and low vaccine availability. So that's something that we're ramping up and plan to do that going forward. And then finally, partner visits. Courtney and I are going to be doing a series of visits to community collaborators around the state. And we're going to take 2 weeks to do this. And we hope to meet with as many of you as we can. And we definitely are planning another visit in the near future because it turns out even 2 weeks is not enough to meet with everybody. So at this point, next slide, please. I'm going to pass the floor to Courtney Hayden to walk us through the direction that we're thinking of taking for COVET for this year. Courtney, over to you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Jimena. So as the next slide comes up, I just want to highlight a few of the things that have come up in the chat for our glows and how lucky we are that as we chat through the discussions we're going to have, we have all of these great areas of interest. So sort of what's hidden on these slides is our interest in birth equity, Latino health, digital equity, vaccines, serving the HETF community, preventative health, health equity, and faith-based care for seniors, among many that this group are passionate about. So what we're going to do is we're going to block out our time by the months. So right now we're sort of in this February through May. I know it's March. You were patient with us and we appreciate that. So we're going to move into focusing on these barriers to vaccine. And we are going to sort of move in between having speakers and having in-depth work groups. We'll get into that on the next slide. And in this section, you may hear about communications, particularly social media. How do we approach these concerns around misinformation? And how do we make sure that there's vaccine events with access, which we all know that pointing and saying there's vaccine over there is not the same as access. And we're hopeful that we're going to dive into those deep questions. Then in June through September, we're going to move into public health within a pandemic context. So this is where we start to look at how are we doing in terms of mental health? What about health screenings and bringing it back to our roots, looking at those social determinants of health. And let's ask those hard questions. How can we destigmatize therapy? How do we encourage folks to get back into their pediatrician's office and get back to those routine checkups? And then finally, in October through December, we're going to recap and wrap up. So we're going to reflect on this year. I know it can feel a little bit funny, but we all know that pandemic time feels very different than normal time. So we will blink and be there and hopefully be looking ahead to the holidays in 2023. And at this point, really having a positive lens, how do we share our progress with the community? And on a not so positive lens, if we're still in this in the circle here, how are we going to prepare for a holiday surge if that's necessary? You can head to the next slide. Thank you. So this is just a little bit more in depth here. So you're going to see that we'll go from this guest speaker. So you can see we've done some of these things today. We're meeting and greeting. We know who everyone's working with. We know who our roles are. And then we're going to move then into discussions of topics. So what you learned today, we're going to chance to deep dive. How does this play out in our communities when we're talking about this hesitancy in communication? What levels of resource exist in your local communities and what resources are lacking? Then we'll come back again the next month and start to apply that topic. So now we've been given tools from experts in the fields. We've had a chance to roundtable what we see in our community and what's lacking. And now how can we start to set some goals and set up some steps to really drill in and start to make some direct change. Then the next time we get together, we'll have a chance to learn from each other. So we'll have those subcommittee report outs. One of the things that's implied here is, how do I know which group I'm going to go to, right? So if we have a speaker and then we have these small groups, how do you know where you're going to go? You will get a survey, and I won't steal thunder because Dr. Jimena is going to chat about this at the end, but you will have a chance to opt in to which of the subgroups you want to stick with. You are welcome to move between subgroups, and we acknowledge and are really impressed by the work that is sometimes done across work groups. There may be multiple you're interested in. Our primary request is that from the time of the speaker to the time of that report out, we're sticking with one subgroup. The subgroups are organized around the executive commissions. So we're going to look at the African American and Black affairs, the Latino and Latinx affairs, the disability community, and the Native American Indigenous communities in Kansas. So we can move forward here. And you're going to start to see a little bit of repeat. So now we'll get into a new topic, the second of the three buckets that we discussed. We'll have the guest speaker. We'll go back into another session where we sort of look at how does this apply in our communities with an eye on those larger topics that we had summarized. So if we know what the needs are in our community and we're headed towards the end of the next year, how do we apply what we know to preventing that surge or to communicating the needs back to the community? And then we'll end with a report out. So I know that was a really quick overview. If there are questions, you can pop it in the chat and I will report back as we go. Whenever we move the next slide, I will have the honor. Here we go. Okay, fantastic. So what is new and what is continued between the COVET that we all know and love and the COVET that we will learn to love even more this year? So what are we continuing to do? We're continuing to engage directly with diverse communities, and our goal and our focus is still to support those grassroots efforts. What is new is that we want to try to understand the community actions via those COVET report outs, right? So by drilling in with individual communities and starting to put our expertise to work, we're going to share these insights across work groups. Continued as well, we still have access to KDHE and we still have access to the governor's office. What's new around the commissions is that we're going to have some direct leadership from those executive commissions, sometimes in these subcommittee groups. So you may see your commissioner for your affairs section in that meeting with you, maybe not every week. And we're there just to help facilitate conversation, although we also have the university with us, which is helpful. What are we going to continue doing in terms of COVET members? We're still learning about what others are doing in the community, and we're still sharing our successes. And now we're going to start to execute community action around our ideas and collaborate directly again with those commission directors and other COVET members. And finally, we are continuing to receive direct information that's up to date around the member organizations. And of course, these recordings will go online. But really what we want to see happen is that we see action in the community as a result of us creating this space for collaboration and communication. Thank you, Connie, for the positive shout out. We appreciate that. And now it is my great honor. I have been really looking forward to this all morning to introduce you to Miss Terry Barnes of the Nia Project. And I won't take much of this time because this is about spotlighting her and her amazing work. But I will say that her reputation preceded her in the best of ways. So many of us had heard of her work, but hadn't spoken with her directly. And she was willing to take a phone call from me in the middle of the day, hear out about PAVE, what kind of resources PAVE would offer, and said, you know what, hey, actually, maybe we can look into this. And maybe we can come over to the Kansas side of the border from Missouri for the first time. So with that, I'd love to hand over to Ms. Terry Barnes to tell us a little bit about her work and what she's going to do with the PAVE grant.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm really so excited to be here. And I have to tell you that we've thought about Kansas for a long time because many of the people that were part of creating the Nia Project are from Kansas City, Kansas. And so we've known for a long time that we wanted to figure out a way to get over there. We just hadn't quite figured it out. So the Nia Project, in a nutshell, it's a nonprofit. The nonprofit itself, we just started the nonprofit in 2021, but we've been doing this work since 2018. And the work that we do are the pictures that you see on your screen, and it's our signature program called Black Women Get Fit. And what Black Women Get Fit is all about is bringing Black women together and really focusing on mind, body, and soul in a fun way. And so with this initiative, we wanted to do two things. We wanted to support Black-owned businesses, and we wanted to get community who may not have an opportunity to experience some of these things to come out and experience these things in community. So in 2018, the way this all came about, in 2018, you see in the center top an organization called Girl Track. Girl Track is a national organization who set out to get 1 million Black women walking. And one of the members of Girl Track is here in Kansas City, and we were on a walk, and she told me that Girl Track was coming to Kansas City. And I said, well, I hadn't heard that. And she said, well, yeah, they're going to be in Kansas City in a couple of months. They're going to really try to get a foothold in Kansas City and get more trackers to be a part of this movement. And I said, well, I hadn't heard that. And I'm afraid that women in the community haven't heard it either. What can we do to raise awareness that this awesome organization is coming to Kansas City and Black women need to turn out? And so before our walk was over, we came up with this idea, let's put together this event and let's call it Black Women Get Fit. And we'll invite all of these fitness instructors and we'll have them come out and we'll collect everybody's emails. And when the event is over, we can invite them all to this Girl Track event. So we thought it was, well, that night I went home and I called a few fitness instructors that I just personally know and asked them if they would be willing to do it. Every one of them said yes, they thought it would be great. And so within 48 hours, we had this idea for this fitness event. So we called 18th Invite, because we're not a nonprofit in 2018. We have no money. We just had this fun idea. And so I called some folks down on 18th and Vine and asked them if we could use space to host this event. Everybody kept saying yes. And so within about 6 weeks, we had a plan for Black Women Get Fit. And we had 15 fitness instructors who were willing to donate their time. We did all the marketing, we did all the promotion. And on our first event, we had 200 women sign up and show up at this event. And we were just absolutely overwhelmed, because there were women who were making comments like, I didn't know there was a swimming pool in Greg Kleiss Community Center. And I apologize, this is all Kansas City, so I don't know how familiar you all are with it, but 18th and Vine is a very popular area that has a community center and lots of museums and different things. But we were discovering that there were Black women in the community that had never been down there. So we just had this wonderful experience. And after it was over, women were saying, well, when are we going to do this again? And we thought, well, there's not going to be an again, because we're not an official group. We just wanted to do this to get this other group support. And very long story short, we are celebrating our 5th year in 2022. We've been doing it every year. The first year we had 200 women. The second year we had 400 women. The third year, COVID hit, and we had to move everything online, which was difficult, but we still had 300 people log in. We had 20 cities and 4 countries all watching us exercise and talk about a variety of different issues that are important to Black women. And so in 2021, which was last year, we were able to get back together. We were out in Swope Park. We had 300 women show up, and we really expanded our workshops to include things like mental health and wellness, how to manage stress. And so it has really turned into this wonderful experience. And so we were able to get some funding from the Kansas City Health Department in support of COVET, the same kind of thing that Kansas is doing. And that has allowed us to do marketing and have t-shirts and all the fun things that people expect to have. And it has just been a pretty incredible experience. I will tell you, we just had our first, so prior to this year, we only did this once a year. So every October we have this big event. Well, with the funding, we're able to do this monthly. So instead of having 20 women, which is what we normally have at an annual event, we have 20 different practitioners who come and talk to us about all kinds of things. We only have 5 or 6. So we just had our first one last month. It was about a couple weeks ago. And I have to share with you a verbatim comment that came out of that presentation. And I'm not going to be able to find it because I don't know how to, let me see, I got to shrink my screen. I'm not going to be able to find it. But we do a Survey Monkey after every event now to collect feedback. And we had a very specific comment that said, I can't wait until you bring this over to Kansas City, Kansas. We really would love to have something like this in our community. And there were some additional words, but I don't have that in front of me. So I'm really excited about the opportunity to come over to Kansas City, Kansas, and quite frankly, to connect. There's so much crossover between what we do and Kansas City, Kansas. As I said, we work with women who are already in Kansas. So they're excited that we're thinking to come over there to do the work. So yeah, these photos that you see are just all photos of the women who are in different, like you see the women biking. We had 50 women sign up for swimming. So, you know, swimming is also an issue in our community. So we found that if it's organized and is well marketed, women will show up, and it's really like a fellowship. I mean, we just really had a great morning.
Thank you so much, Ms. Terry. I just, there we go. I want to end and just let this sort of linger on the page as we kind of close out your section. So thank you so much. And thank you for being willing to bring together fitness with the COVID-19 vaccine with the Black and African American female community. I think everyone who knows me, I didn't put my glow as fitness in the chat, but I really love it. And so, you know, combining this to where it's a comfortable environment, we're getting people moving, And we have vaccine there for them when and if they're ready, or if they just have questions to ask. We appreciate you, and we are so excited to have you in Kansas.
Thank you. We look forward to working with you all. It's going to be great.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Terry, for that. It was wonderful to hear about that exciting work. It feels energizing just hearing about it. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
We'll move on to our next set of presenters. One of the best parts of being part of this group is that you get the opportunity to introduce people who are doing amazing work like Ms. Terry, and also sometimes are long-term valued colleagues like the next two folks for us. So I'm just really excited to introduce Mariana Ramirez and Ian Knight as our next presenters. I was a little bit late to ask for their bio, and I told them that if I didn't get it in time, I would just say they're really awesome. So in addition to being very awesome, I want to just note that Mariana Ramirez is the director of the Juntos Center for Advancing Latino Health at the University of Kansas Medical Center. As the director of Juntos, she oversees a number of growing academic and community partnerships and is highly involved in many different coalitions and boards, including the Health Equity Task Force in Wyandotte County. Since March 2020, she's been very involved with the coordination of community-based testing and vaccination efforts and communications tailored to Latinos in Wyandotte County and across Kansas. Joining Mariana is Ian Knight. Ian received his master's in communication from Wichita State in Wichita, where he also taught about public speaking for 2 years. Ian worked with health clubs, cancer treatment centers, clinics, and other health-related efforts to advance communications and marketing efforts before the pandemic. In early 2020, Ian joined our team at KU Med Center, specifically around communications, and has been working to create strategic communications strategies and content that support community-related health initiatives, particularly around COVID testing. So with that, I'll hand it to Mariana and Ian, who will present today. Thank you both for coming.
Thank you, Vicky, for having us, and thank you, Dr. Jimena, for the invitation. So I work with Ian in this RADEX project, but also wanted to take the opportunity to tell you a little bit about the work we've been doing with Juntos Center. We are based at the University of Kansas Medical Center and have been very involved, as Vicky described, in the COVID pandemic since 2 years now. Thank you, Vicky. We can go to the next one. Thanks. So today, really wanted to share a little bit about some focus groups that we did with unvaccinated Latinos across Kansas in coordination with Kansas Department of Health and Environment. Some of our work with tailored communications and outreach, and a few lessons learned. And I'm going to start with the focus groups. So we work with KDHE and Juntos and NORC at the University of Chicago in Juntos. So NORC, this was an effort from KDHE to understand vaccine hesitancy across the state. So NORC did this statewide survey and also focused on multiple populations, and then Juntos focus exclusively on the Latino participants. So I'm just going to talk about the Juntos portion of the work, but if you want to access the full report, it's available at KDHE's website. So Juntos, in collaboration with Dr. Chen and Dr. Coley Akers, conducted 6 focus groups with a total of 50 Latino participants in Seward, Ford, Finney, Sedgwick, Johnson, or Wyandotte counties. And we stratify our groups in 3 populations, including young adults ages 18 to 24, adults 25 to 54. Those 2 groups were unvaccinated. And then we also had parents of unvaccinated children ages 12 to 17. And we have 4 main domains in our focus group guide. I think I might need a click for thank you so much. And you can click for all of them. Thank you. So the domains included perceptions of the COVID vaccine, barriers, knowledge, beliefs, and attitudes toward the vaccine, booster shots, FDA approval, communications, And also we had a very brief survey about demographics, past vaccine behavior, and attitudes towards the vaccine. Thank you. This is a snapshot of the social demographics of our participants. And I wanted to draw your attention to three things that may have impacted the responses that we got. So even though almost 3/4 of our participants in the age bracket 25 to 54 had health insurance, you can look at that, like 72%, only 39% had health insurance. All of our participants felt confident with content in Spanish, but parents did not feel confident with content in English. And then finally, across all groups, about half of them had experienced COVID, a COVID infection when we met them. We can go to the next slide, thank you. And we really talked to that movable needle. You can see that most of the participants were either unsure about getting the vaccine or wanting to wait and see what happened. And it was a really small proportion who absolutely said, no, I won't get it. So the fact that they were open to explore gave us an opportunity to work with communications and outreach with the goal of helping them make a decision to get vaccinated. Next slide, please. These are some of our findings. Participants reported that the short development timeline of potential side effects was their main concern about across all groups. They also reported unfriendly workplace policies and financial cost of missed work if they were to go get the vaccine. And for parents, they perceived a higher risk of having their children vaccinated compared to them having the infection. And they also were concerned about the sources of information and influence that the children had access to. As far as recommendations, participants recommended, they talked about their interest in getting information from scientists and doctors. They talked about the need for accurate and comprehensive information in Spanish. They wanted to see personal experiences. So people who had already the vaccine, how did they go? How did that go? I want to hear from somebody who looks like me and they got the vaccine and how they're feeling now. And they also talked about the importance of both social media and traditional media to communicate all of this information. You can see there are a couple of quotes illustrating those findings. Next slide, please. So KDHE took these findings and worked with multiple groups, including the Kansas Hispanic and Latino American Affairs Commission, Latin to Latin Marketing Agency, and COVID stakeholders across the state to inform the Por los Nuestros communications campaign. So Por los Nuestros translates as for our people. And they feature people who had the vaccine and how their experience went. They also focus on family values and that communication with parents and children. And they developed a Spanish language website with information about the vaccine. So all of those findings that we had in our focus groups were incorporated in this campaign. Next slide, please. And then on Juntos end, we have been doing multiple things. Again, hearing these participants saying, we want scientists, we want doctors, we want information in Spanish, we partnered with KLAC to continue and expand our Juntos Radio podcast. So now it's also a Facebook Live, and we do it twice a month. And we've been offering vaccine updates, COVID updates with the help of Dr. Garcia and other physicians and health professionals who provide updates on COVID-19. And just last year, we had about 89,000 reach and 1,300 downloads of the podcast. Pregúntale a Loritos, a campaign that uses social media and print materials and addresses multiple questions, common questions about COVID, and it's tailored culturally and linguistically to the needs of Latinos. You can see this one features some like piñatas and rosca de reyes, and it's talking about how to celebrate safely. Next slide, please. We partner with RADEX to develop some of these Lorito materials in multiple languages, including English and Vietnamese. So we, in Wyandotte County, we have been working with multiple Latino businesses and have been providing weekly outreach at their location. So we have a community health worker who's every week at the business talking to people about the vaccine, about testing, and you can see the picture there. And we also feature their own employees who had already been vaccinated and ask them to provide a quote of why they got vaccinated and inviting others to do it. So again, listening to what the focus group told us, they said, we want testimonies. We want to hear from those that look like us and have already done it. And so you can see a couple of examples here. Can go to the next slide, please. And focusing on the youth component, so parents told us they don't listen to us, they listen to their friends, they listen to their peers. So we did a couple of things. We created a video contest where youth who had already been vaccinated developed a 30-second video and invited others to get vaccinated. So far, we have had over 10,000 views in that contest. And yesterday, we inaugurated our soccer clinics. We are providing 100 scholarships for youth who are vaccinated to get into a 4-day soccer clinic. And that includes their soccer ball and their t-shirt, because we want to encourage physical activity, but we also want to ramp up those vaccine rates. So that's a way to do it. I was there yesterday night and it was just amazing. See these almost 100 children vaccinated and playing safely. And we had to turn a few away because they weren't vaccinated, but we told them, if you get vaccinated, you can come back for the next clinic with your vaccine card. And then they were very excited. So hopefully we'll see some of that. Go to the next slide, please. And so we also heard our participants said, I cannot take time off work to go get vaccinated. I work all week long, and it's really hard to take that time off. So we have been partnering with Catholic churches and with multiple partners like the Health Equity Task Force, Heart to Heart International, Vibrant Health, the local health departments, to do vaccination events in a place where people trust, where they feel comfortable, and at a time that is accessible to them, meaning a lot of weekends, a lot of evenings, and we have had an amazing response. These wonderful partners have enabled us to tailor the whole experience. So we offer tacos, we have a taco truck. We've also been able to offer chicken and ham during the holidays. And in 2022, we either supported events or hosted our own events and reached out around 1,700 people who received a vaccine shot, and then about 1,000 who got a COVID test. And again, this is joint work. The Health Equity Task Force, the health departments, like everybody coming together to make these events possible. The next one is on March 19. It's going to be at Sacred Heart. And I think some of our lessons learned include that partnership with trusted community partners, the ability to tailor things linguistically and culturally so they resonate with audiences, and communicating in multiple platforms. And I think that's it. Thank you.
All right, that was a quick transition. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ian Knight. I'm the communications coordinator with our RADEX Up project. Thank you, Mariana, for kicking us off. I am glad your presentation was so much more thorough and fun than mine is. So hi to everyone that I've met before and hi to all the new faces. Next slide, please. So I want to kick us off today with our lessons learned and a basic definition of what is communications. Depending on the organization or school that you come from, you have a very different understanding of communications. Most people think of communications as just a flyer or a video to send out information, but it's actually a little bit deeper than that. If you look at the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition here, you can see that's actually an exchange of information. And I want to point out to this graphic here, it's an exchange of information. That means there is a receiver and there is a sender. It takes two people to communicate, and that's going to come back later on in our lessons learned as well. So I'm going to make sure I turn on my gallery mode here to make sure I can see everyone's faces. The biggest part about communications, or the biggest emphasis on I want to make, is communications actually makes work easier. Just as an example of there, how many of you have been involved in a chain of emails that has nothing to do with you? Just by a show of hands. I'm seeing nodding heads, handshakes, yes. Reverend Carter, I've been on a couple of those email chains with you myself. Yes, it causes delay in your work, especially if you have 20 chains together where you have to go through from the very bottom to see maybe where you are. Well, it takes off maybe an hour of your day that you could have been doing something else. It also can cause delays in matters of life, in which the case that we're dealing with today in COVID, it actually does. Delays in communications has cost lives. Next slide, please. And I promise I'm going to try to condense as much of this information as I can, as fast as I can, but this presentation will be available for download after today's session. There is a strategy that goes into those messages that you see at the end of the day. And right now I want to start off with our business objective strategies. No matter if it's a nonprofit, a small business, a large university, your organization has an objective or a goal that it's set out at the beginning of the year. So for instance, in the grant that we're working with in RADx Up, we had very detailed goals that we had to hit. And I won't go through all of them, but I'm going to go with the one that relates with us the most. Goal number one, bring high-risk rural and urban Kansas communities together to better understand barriers to COVID testing and rapidly deploy effective interventions to increase COVID testing in at-risk communities. That's a mouthful. So essentially, what are we doing? We need to break down barriers and get people tested for COVID. So when we move over to our communication objectives derive directly from our business objectives. Everything that we do goes towards the company or the grant goal here. So in our communication objectives, what's our goal? We need to decipher information that combats misinformation to help promote testing among underserved communities. Very simple, very clear to understand, and we further break those down into further goals. So with that said, when we move on into our current situation, this is where it gets a little bit trickier, and this is where we're going to get a little bit more into depth. Whoever is working the slideshow, I'm assuming it's Dr. Collie Akers. I apologize ahead of time. I'm going to ask you to move over to the next slide, because we're going to move back to the other one here in a minute. When you're evaluating your current situation, it's best to use a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So if you've ever been in the business process, this may look a little familiar to you. If not, I've provided some very simple definitions here. Strengths: what do you do well? Every team, communications team, has members in it that has their strengths. For instance, Mariana with us, she is excellent when it comes to deciphering information for our Latin population. When it comes to me, content development, overall strategy. When it comes to Yvonne on our team, she is very good at seeing the big picture and filling in the gaps that we may have missed. Everyone has their strengths, and it's important that you lean on everyone for those strengths. Weaknesses: what do you not do well? That's a little bit harder to identify internally within our group, because we've done a pretty good job of covering things. But let's say in your group, you don't have someone who's great at developing content or a graphic designer. Maybe that's time to outsource for those or hire for those roles, or outsource to a freelancer. Opportunities: when we start looking externally, what are some areas that you could explore to take advantage of? For instance, in our RADx Up project, we realized that we weren't actually doing a lot of webinars in the beginning and actually getting live feedback. So we thought that was a great avenue to explore further in. And then we look over at threats, external forces that pose a threat to the objective. In our case, who's stopping us or preventing us from getting people tested or promoting more vaccinations? Misinformation, campaigns that are a little bit more politically driven. Can we go back to the previous slide, please? So that's a good way to evaluate your current situation. And then we're talking about competitor research. In our case, competitive research, as we all know, was definitely directed towards more misinformation. People that wanted to lean more on their policies and political endeavors, especially during the campaign season. People who just flat out, I don't want to say were pushing other agendas, but they were really trying to stop us from getting people tested and vaccinated for whatever reason. If we can go 2 slides past this one, please. This is a perfect example of competitor research. Over here, we actually have a screenshot of a Good Morning America post that I saw a couple of days ago. I want to give a shout out to one of the hosts. She's actually a former Heights High alumni back in Wichita, Kansas, where I'm from. But we can see here that the Florida Department is actually not promoting vaccines for healthy children. Why not? What's the point to be? We understand that Florida as a state has its own agenda, but it's something that when we're trying to promote vaccinations and testing among our populations, that is something that we see as a threat. So when you're doing your competitive research, you should be able to answer all these questions that we have over here to the left. And I want to highlight the last one here. What has not worked well for your competitors, and how can you capitalize on it? I.e. for us, that's where we took a lot of advantage of webinars, live events, and in terms of some campaigns, radio spots. Can we go back to the previous 2 slides? Okay, target audience and research segmentation. This is one of the areas that a lot of people, if you don't come from a communications background, it's probably going to be the most daunting for you, but it's actually one of the more important. You have, in our case, messages that need to be crafted to promote your communication objectives to specific audiences, and your audiences need to be incredibly specific. So for instance, if I'm promoting a message to get African Americans tested for COVID, you have to realize that there are more subgroups of African Americans within that larger African American group. You have highly educated African Americans who work with sororities and fraternities within communities. You have your blue collar working African Americans who may go work at a Coleman or Koch Industries or Johnson Controls that work 12-hour shifts. We have 2 very different ways of receiving information and interpreting information and how we react to it. You're going to need different calls to action, different visuals to promote the overall same communications objectives. And there's many other subgroups in there as well. And just to break it out even further, so we're targeting African Americans. What about your rural populations? Well, rural populations, they don't commute in big cities. They don't generally have the same political views. You're going to craft different messages to overall promote the same communications objectives. So the biggest issue that I've seen so far when going through this RADx up process is we all may look at the objectives the same, but when it comes to crafting those messages for individualized segmented populations, that's where it gets a little muddy. And it also requires a lot of resources because even though the message is the same, the visuals, the wording, especially when translating to non-English speaking populations, it can get very lengthy in time. And I want to emphasize here, start with audiences that are your highest priority. If you're working with rural populations and you know they are the ones the most at risk that you need to reach, that's where you should start off with and focus most of your attention to. And now we're going to move over into consumer insights. There's no slide for this one, so we can stay right here. I'm not going to make you work. How are the people receiving the information? How are they adjusting to it? Are they actually doing what they want? Or what comments are they leaving on your social media pages? It could get very intricate in the feedback process. And depending on what school of communication you come from, this consumer insight is actually driven into the evaluations process. But I like this graphic here because I think it's very simple for those who don't come from a communications background. The one thing that I really want to emphasize here under consumer insights is if you did your research correctly, you should see improvement in your messaging. If you notice that your messaging isn't improving or you're not getting the feedback that you want, you need to take a step back and go back to your audience research and segmentation and make some adjustments. All right, and channels of communications. This is probably the one here that everyone's most familiar with. We have in-person communications, we have video conferencing like we're doing right now, text messaging, social media messages, print ads, print postings. Those channels of communications are incredibly useful after you've identified the message that you want to craft, which once again drives back to that communication objective. And you probably noticed I've said that multiple times today. Everything falls in that cycle and should always be traceable back through the model. Okay, next slide, please. Well, 2 slides, sorry. There we go. So now that we've gone over what goes behind the scenes before we get to the effective messages, let's take a look at an example produced for our community health worker campaign. So when we look at this message, we can have a clearly identified audience. We have a more Latinx driven audience here that this message was made for. What is the purpose of this message? We have, if you are vaccinated, you are still at risk. You should still get tested for COVID. What communication channel did this go out through? This went out through Twitter and Instagram. Thus, that's why it's so neatly condensed in a square box as it is. And the evaluation. How can we tell if this worked? This is where your metrics come into play. Did they leave comments? Did they like and share it? You can actually trace to see if people clicked on this to see if there was a link attached to it. There are many ways to evaluate effective messaging. Next one, please. And then we have the segmented audiences here as well. Same message, but different audiences. We have an older Spanish-speaking gentleman to my right on the screen, and we have a darker woman here to the left. So same message, segmented audiences to still promote the overall communications objective. Next slide, please. So we just went over the overall communication strategy, but now we're talking about crisis communications, because when we look at the terms of the project and COVID of what we've been dealing with, it's all been crisis. It's mostly been crisis communications. And in crisis, you have to address the significant threat that is posing challenges to your business or organizations. And when we look here, we can see that COVID-19, which I talked about earlier, it has had a significant threat to our health and it has led to deaths. So we have a public safety issue, financial loss issue, depending on what business you're in, and reputation loss. So in this question that I've asked here in the corner, has COVID-19 damaged reputations? If you look at public health as a whole, you can see that we are losing a lot of workers. We are having a lot of stress coming from the top down. We've had nurses quit. We've had people that maybe that weren't on the anti-vaccination train possibly jump on. This is a crisis that we've had to address as we've continued. Next slide, please. And I know I'm running short on time here, so I'm going to try to make this quick. In response to our crisis communication, what have we done? We've listened to our community health workers and implemented their feedback to address them with applicable messages, i.e. our COVID-19 Divine Nine town halls that some of you were actually that you either participated in or viewed. And then we have the post-crisis of the communication and the crisis communication strategy. So what is the messaging that we put out? Did it work well? If it did work well, what did work well in it? And how can we better plan and prepare for future endeavors? Next slide, please. We're a little short on time, so I'm going to skip past this one, but this shows the metrics of our Divine Nine series and how well it did work. So lessons learned overall. The thing that we learned the most from a communication standpoint is involving trusted community leaders is advantageous. I know this is something that Mariana touched on earlier in her presentation as well, but listen to your audience. They will tell you the information that you need to give them. Pre-crisis communication planning is needed across a lot of entities. I think this is one of the bigger issues that we saw across the project. If you don't have a crisis communication plan in place, you're going to struggle to get one as things come along, and you're always going to be in a reactive state instead of proactive. And I've touched on this earlier in the presentation as well. Audience segmentation is incredibly useful, and you should definitely look more into it because not all audiences are the same. I know that was a little fast. I know I'm a minute. Oh, no, I'm not. Look at that. I still made it. And I know it's a lot of information, but I have additional resources linked into this presentation where you can actually find misinformation templates. You can see where we are with COVID. The PR Institute, which is the third one there, has also great information as well. Thank you for your time, everyone. Back to you, Dr. Garcia.
Thank you so much, Ian. That was amazing. And Mariana, really thank you to everybody for spending this hour with us. Thank you for those who shared your work. Just really quick, we're planning to have these meetings monthly. So the next one will be in April, and please look for an email coming that has a survey about like general good times to meet in the future, and also which interest area group you're planning to join going forward. So thank you all, and hope to see you in April.